West Esport coach. I'm currently Normal West Esport coach, and I also coach at the community college, which is Heartland Community College. So I wear multiple hats. Three specifically. I'm a district-wide esport coach for Unit 5. I coach at the high school, Normal West, and then of course I am also at Heartland. So I get to see the whole gamut of esports from middle school all the way up to college, which is kind of fun. So I'm going to kind of blow through these slides. If you have any questions, just raise your hand or just ask in chat as we go. And I'll stick around and have a sub for today or for this morning. So I'll stick around for questions at the end. So big theme is for when I start our esports program is we want to start with community. I'm a traditional coach at heart. I've head coach, head football coach, head basketball coach. Uh, and so I know that when I always step back from my role as a coach, that at the end of the day, we're really dealing with communities of people. The bigger community would be, of course, be families, and then the communities itself that we live in. But then as you get down to the more atomic level, we're just dealing with students in the student community. So, you hear the term student athlete or band member or kid in choir or kid that does drama. Those are just the various communities that are in our school. So when we started to look at esports at especially Normal West, where it started, I really wanted to make sure that we first had a very sound community, a place that kids can idealize with or be part of, and a place where kids can see themselves at and being part of. So we really focused on community on the beginning of esports about 5 years ago. And here's a picture. It's aged so funny. I look back at this slide, and yeah, here's our first four members who started esports at Normal West. And they were the ones that kind of laid the groundwork. We let the when I say we, I let the students define what they thought their community should be. And that was a big step of getting esports going, was having the students kind of take the wheel. I didn't want it to be in a sponsor driven program. I didn't want it to be a coach driven program, mostly because I don't foresee myself always being in this position. And so I know that if we make it a community driven approach, that when I move around or move up or I'm no longer in this position, the program and esports itself will continue to keep moving along at Normal West. So one of the themes that we started out with was just social. So if you're new to esports, you want to get started, it was literally just about us getting kids together after school in a safe spot where we literally had pizza. They came, ate pizza, drank some soda, played all types of games. I didn't really curate the list at that time of like games that we're not going to play. It was really all about getting kids in the same space and just getting excited about playing esports and experiencing just the community of that. And then as the community started growing, that's when we started looking at like, well, where can esports go for these students outside of just social and getting together? The bottom picture you can see is we started bringing in coaches from the colleges to come talk to my kids about opportunities that esports provided at the next level beyond just high school. And ironically enough, we're now repeating the same process this year at our middle schools. So we now have esports starting up at our middle schools, where for a middle school student, the next step is high school. So now I have high school students from across our district going to the middle schools to talk to them about esports, but then also help play in their clubs, coach the players at the middle school. And so we're kind of repeating the same process, but now at the middle school level, which is kind of cool to see. And we'll talk later about it, but it also gives our students another leadership opportunity to develop their leadership and interpersonal skills. So we kind of broke up esports in like two ways that we kind of looked at it. Is we looked at academy play, which is more like your serious, hey, we want to sit, we want to practice, we want to build our competitive community up. In open play, open play is kind of like a club aspect where students come, they can play. If they don't show up during open play, it's not like a big deal. You're not letting anyone down. And we saw that open play was super popular at the start. And then as we became more competitive as a program, a lot of the open play players kind of migrated to the academy play. And now we're at like about a 50% of half my students that I deal with esports are just, the one time or 2 time a week they show up to open play. and the other half are the ones who, they want to go compete, they want to prove their skill set, and they want to go and like win state and get trophies and all that kind of stuff. So I've seen over the last 5 years, the open play's kind of gone down, but it's only gone down because I'm having cannibalism with the academy play. So if you're looking to model this, you're going to see some of that. There will be some cannibalism that will occur within the program of between your social open club play and your competitive side. And top right, this is one of our first tournaments we went to, 6-6 games. This is our League of Legends team, which is kind of cool. Two of the players in the picture, they're now playing at college on scholarship. So it's kind of interesting to see that. I'm sure when they sat down to play, it was now 5 years ago, that they had no idea. They had no idea that they're going to get scholarships to play at the next level. So it's kind of cool. After that, after community, we looked at the next C, and we kind of realized that was culture. So what do we want esports to be, and what we don't want it to be? And that's something that's really important to define. I think of being a traditional coach. I looked at like, when you think of Duke basketball, what do you think of? When you think of Alabama football, what do you think of? When you think of Tom Brady and Belichick's Patriots, what do you think of in terms of their culture that they have within their teams? And we kind of went through and we identified that like there is a lot of power and influence in culture, especially for the kids when they join our communities. And so we wanted to establish like what are our norms, what do we want from our students, and what do we expect out of each other. And so right off the bat, we had a great student leadership group, and so we wanted to define what the winning culture was in our program, and we also wanted to make sure that our program was also open, and that was a hard one because as you become more geared towards winning and trying to be an elite athlete, you do and you can sometimes alienate just people who just want to play for fun. And so we had to balance those two. But I think we hit a nice sweet spot where our elite players were very welcoming, very opening, very helping. And on the flip side, our casual players ended up becoming some of our biggest cheerleaders and our biggest like fans and support base. So culture, huge thing. I would say establish it early with your program and make sure you really articulate what it is that you're looking for. With the culture, we can talk about it, but like how do you go about creating the culture that you want to see in your program? And I don't know if this is like at the same time I was doing marketing, my MBA, so I don't know if this is like kind of bled into this, but we sat down, we kind of made a roadmap, and this is the roadmap we started with. Is we had one or two students be our PR marketing position, so they'd be on our leadership team for the club side, and their whole job is just to hype up, pump up esports in the hallway, in the cafeteria, in their classes. They're the ones that are out there. So now it's called our recruiting chair. And so they're the ones out there recruiting players, because the reality is right now in esports, it's you might have a top 1% player in your hallway, in your classroom, that you don't know about. Because when you play basketball, if you're a top 1% basketball, you're playing in local gyms and people start to know who you are. But in esports, you can be a top 1% esport athlete, at a very small school of 100 kids, and no one's going to know. So the whole point of our PR marketing was to not only advance the culture, but also cast that net to bring players in. And players will either accept being part of the esports program or reject your esports program based on not only the internal culture, but the prevailing culture that people think of it. So it's important to keep that in context, that you want to maintain both those. Step two, we set out to get some official platforms. So we were on Twitter at one time. We're on Instagram, where the kids are at. We have, of course, a website. And so we wanted to make sure that we become established. So when students kind of look around and check things out, we're just not like, we don't want to be clumped in with just a club. We're more than a club. We're a team. We're like the football program, the basketball program. We have boosters. We have a Facebook site for the parents to kind of check in on. So we wanted step two, like we wanted to get our official platforms off the ground. And of course, the PR marketing students, they kind of took care of that. I mean, I helped set them up. I have ultimate control. But at the end of the day, it's the students that are creating the content for a lot of those platforms for the other students to kind of consume, which of course it's that loop of culture of like, okay, this is relevant, this is important, this is cool, this is where I want to be. There's value here. I can participate. I can just be a spectator. And so students start to find themselves in that kind of loop. Most everyone here probably already knows, but you're probably going to need Discord for esports. This is kind of how student athletes on esports communicate. It's how college coaches communicate. It's how coaches between schools communicate. So it's almost a must. And that was a big step for me. Out of all the steps that we've talked about so far, setting up Discord was the hardest for me. I'm somewhat of a tech savvy guy, and I just never used it before. So it was very intimidating at first. But I had a student who was our tech liaison, who was our tech position, and he sat me down. He created the Discord server with me. He showed me how to set permissions. And that would be my biggest advice is for some of these things. If you ask your students, they will 99 out of 100 times send you or give you the best advice because they want to see this stuff succeed. They want to, have a good environment, a safe environment. What they don't want to have happen is you get something going and then something's done inappropriately and then it kind of shinks the whole ship for everyone. So students want to help out. And so I leaned on students with the Discord a lot and they kind of helped me set up our server and everything, which is kind of interesting. The next one is share. So anytime you have any success, share it across all your media, share it in your school notes, share it with the community, send it to the newspaper, go to school board meetings, share it there, because the hype and sharing your success and your involvement, it's going to build that culture of success. But then it's also going to help later on when it's like, we might need a computer lab. We might need an arena. I might need $5,000 for hardware. Administrators are much more likely to help out if there's already a culture of success with your esports or just a culture of participation with your esports. It's a much harder sell to be like, yeah, we want to do esports. We don't know how many kids we have interested in. Can you give us a $20,000 check? That's a really hard sell. So build up that culture, build up that hype. And then when you get to that point where you start making those kind of capital investments, they almost seem like no brainers at that point. By the way, I can't see chat right now, so I apologize if someone's asking questions. If you are, we'll get to them. Evolution. So for us at Unit 5, we kind of start like this, and you can do this. I've seen other districts do this, larger districts. I've seen smaller districts kind of do it at a smaller scale between their schools. But we started simply as a high school club. And then from the club in the spring of 2019, we became competitive West Esports. But then we had this huge problem, of course, with COVID and everything. But we also had kids from normal community, which is our rival school, wanting to join our club. And according to like our own district policies, like if we offer one thing at one high school, we have to offer it at the other, or we have to allow the students to come participate. So before I knew it, like I was having, 30-40% of my students were coming from the other high school, which is kind of interesting. And then we started pulling kids from the private schools. So we have University High School in town. So they started showing up in my Discord wanting to play and practice. And then Central Catholic had a couple kids showing up wanting to play. And then Bloomington High School, which now has their own esports team. Now they're not even in our district. We had a couple kids too being like, hey, you got this really cool thing going at Normal West. Can I come play? And it's like, yes, and no. Like, yes, you can. We'll always have a spot for you to come play and practice, like an open gym. And I want good players because the only way my players can get better is to play against other good players. And if you know anything about esports, if you beat up on the same 5 kids every time, that gets kind of boring. So to bring new kids in to beat up on, it's kind of fun. And they're from another high school, so you can kind of talk trash and it gets kind of fun. But then that also, of course, goes back to the culture where it's like, oh, well, the normal kids are doing it. The West kids are doing it. There's a group of kids at Bloomington that are doing it. And then, we have hosts like a tournament or something at Normal West, and you have 35, 40, 50 kids show up. It helps affirm that culture that you're trying to establish within your own building, but then the community as a whole, because it's just not Normal West parents that are hearing about esports. Now, Bloomington High School parents are hearing about esports. Normal community kids are hearing about esports. Central Catholic, which is my old high school I went to, is hearing about esports. U-High has a coach now, and they've heard about esports. And so this all kind of started back in 2018. we'll see if this plays. So competition now. So we talked about culture, we talked about community, and now the last C is competition. I'm not going to talk about hardware at all because we got two experts on that. But what does it look like competition? And there's two faces to competition in esports. And this is the weird thing is, and this is more prevalent in esports than any other athletic competition in high school. It's kind of weird because when you think of professional athletics and college athletics, you have two sides of the coin. You can either watch the activity in person or you can watch it on TV. Now, when you get to college and professional levels, more people consume their teams through media than they do in person. Esports is the same way. The majority of the kids uh, will be consuming the matches and everything else through through some type of online TV, like a stream. It can normally be YouTube, it can be Twitch. It seems like more people moving to YouTube right now, but we can consume it on YouTube. Whereas you can still watch it in person, but there's two sides, and I'm going to show you two little clip bits here, about 30 seconds long, and they show the exact same match. One of them's happening online, because the match is performed and it's being streamed. So you're watching it through like what kids are watching at home. And then one of them is the exact same match, the exact same competition, but it's what's happening in the physical space. And so it's kind of interesting to be able to see the dichotomy between the two, because you don't have to do both. You just have to do one of them. But when you see both, I think it allows administrators and teachers to say, okay, I can see where this can go. And I hope you guys can hear the audio.
Jared, we can't
So we're
hear.
getting towards the end of, you can't hear the audio. So I'll explain it to you. We're at the end of a match. It's a championship for the Capitals Classic, and the little green blob guy just won. Okay, he just beat a student from Salem. So it was Normal West for Salem last match. This is like 4 or 5 years ago. And they just won. And so this was, of course, streamed live, and there's like 100 people watching it, which is kind of interesting. Then in person, the exact same event. You probably won't hear it, but that's okay. You'll see it on the TV, and then you have about 50 or 60 students watching it. And if you look to the right, that big bright light is, that's where the students are playing. And so you have some technology going on here, which is really cool. So they're streaming this to the community, larger community, but then the people who are there in that day of the event, they're going to watch it. And they start hollering and stuff, but you'll notice when the match gets over, it's just like a sporting event. I mean, these spectators, these fans, these parents, other players, they're just gonna get up on their feet and they're gonna start going crazy. And it's way more efficient more effective when you hear the volume. But so there's how competition happens. I do know later this year we have the IHSEA uh, land competitions at NIU, and we also have the IHSA that's happening at I think Oak Brook. If you haven't had a chance to see esports in person at the high school level, I very strongly suggest that you get out there and at least see it in person. Maybe bring a couple of your students. I mean, it'll be like, wow, this is magical. And then from there, we looked at our competitive side and we started saying, okay, what games can we play? What coaches do we have access to? And what players do we have access to? And so we just started, just like a flow chart, or having like a football team where you have your defense, you have your offense, you have your special teams. We started laying out our competitive rosters and who's going to coach and who's going to play. And from there, it just runs itself. So nothing too crazy there. I believe it works. We've been very successful at Unit 5. We have half a dozen state championships, a dozen state placements. Uh, Tons of my kids have played at the college level. This is the first group in the upper left-hand corner, 2021. Cam on the way right and Questy in the front. The front right and the front back, right back. They just won the first Missouri Valley Conference Smash tournament. So Missouri Valley Conference had their first Smash match, and that's athletics for like ISU, SIU. They had their first ever athletic Super Smash Brothers match, and they were playing for ISU and they won. So that gives you an idea of how it has already spread up to the higher levels, and now conferences are involved, which is pretty fantastic. I won't get into much of this, but I will share that during COVID, it was awesome. We had over 200 kids in our Discord every night. I mean, to think of a school of 1,400, that caught in a lot of other kids, but 200 students were involved in the Discord, finding community, finding solutions, connecting. And since COVID, we have seen a dip. We now have between like 100 to 120 per week. But during peak COVID times, it wasn't unusual for us to hit 200 to 300 students in our Discord. And no, Dr. Phil was not in our Discord. That's just a picture that someone put in there. So I want to make sure no one thinks that Dr. Phil's hanging out with us. Last but not least is value. Just like every sport we do or every activity, it's what value do kids take from it? And it has to just be more than clicking buttons. I tell this to parents. The best programs out there, it's like a real sport where your grades matter, community service matters, philanthropy matters, behavior in the hallways matter. And so you have to make sure that you're bringing that value aspect with the esports. The esports is the carrot, but we need the value there. And that's the justification too for schools to, jump on board and provide these services to the students and to the community, because there is a cost involved. And to justify the cost, we have to make sure that, we can say esports does X and Y, but at the end of the day, we have to go out and do X and Y. And so that was a big part of developing our program, was just not to say, oh, well, hypothetically, at the academic records and some philosophical journals of research that esports players do X and Y. That's great, but what do our esport players do in our buildings? And so keep track of those things, because that goes back to that culture. You can celebrate that later. You can publish that, and parents want to see that. The community wants to see it as well. These stats are outdated a little bit, but this is what I was able to, when I was writing some papers, I was able to mine from our own student data. Now, this is only going to be for Normal West. I don't have access to Bloomington or Central or others records, but I mean, amazing statistics. One of the ones that always stood out to me was 60% of our esport athletes did no other extracurricular activities. So that means this is a hugely underserved group of students, which means like you look at your typical athlete, they might be in like a sport and then do student council. More than half of my students did no other activities. So this is their first extra athletic activity that they've done in high school. And so that's a huge boom, because we're just not retapping the same kids, not saying, oh, here's the same kid that does everything else. Now we're expecting more out of them. It's no, here's a new student that we can develop, we can grow, we can improve upon their interpersonal skills. So that's really kind of valuable. And then, of course, last slide is just them kind of having a fun time. We opened our arena in Heartland a couple of years ago, and of course, the high school kids use it just as freely, because we don't have one. Well, we have one now, but we didn't have one. And kind of like the lineage of the players is kind of when they move from middle school to high school and then to college and beyond. And now we're starting to see a lot of my players graduate from college and move beyond, which is kind of fun to see. That's it.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say thank you, Jared. I'll introduce myself as well. So I'm not one of the main speakers here, but I'm with Bytespeed. I'm your rep for Illinois, and I've been with the company for 16 years. Selling Chromebooks and network infrastructure and all that stuff. But definitely the most exciting projects are gaming PCs for these schools, because I hear stories like Jared, and it's really exciting stuff. So with that, I'll introduce Josh. He's the head of our gaming department here. Josh, take it away.
Sure thing. Thanks, Brian. Jared, awesome presentation. I just want to make sure we pause real quick if there's any questions for him before we move on.
Thank you, Josh, for asking.
No problem.
And then, yeah, people can put it in chat as well.
Yeah. No worries. Okay. I will keep an eye on that. I've got the Q&A and chat and stuff up on my screen, so don't want to get too far ahead, but I can share my screen over here for kind of the technical portion of today. Like Brian said, we work with schools all over Illinois. Bytespeed's a hardware manufacturer at our core. And to get an esports program off the ground, this is a necessary component to your success in some way, shape, or form. So just try to be a resource on kind of what you need to get started for those schools that might not have existing equipment or might be looking to refresh or kind of add to what's currently in the school. Just a little bit about my background, super quick. I'm a former collegiate coach. So I started the varsity program at University of Jamestown in 2016. We're a small NAI school up in North Dakota, but we were one of the first 20 or so varsity programs at the college level, which seems like a lifetime ago, but I love seeing the growth that's happened since, 8 years ago now, from when, we got this tiny little rural college off the ground, to what's happening at the collegiate level now, what's happening at the scholastic and K-12 levels. It's been really fun to see. I joined Bytespeed after being a customer for 3.5 years. We bought all of our equipment from them. So I got to know the team really, really well over that time period. And I made the transition from coaching to, I guess, the dark side in May of 2019 to lead our department that's in charge of all of our esports activations. So I share my experience as a coach and as someone who's kind of built a program from scratch before. I share that kind of firsthand experience with the people that we work with all across the state, across the country, and it's been really fun to help a lot of schools get esports started and off the ground. Two other really quick things that I want to mention. NACAT is the National Association of Esports Coaches and Directors. I've been a advisory board member since 2018 when we started. It's a really great group for if you're looking for some professional development on, maybe you're a new esports coach and are looking for some of those kind of like how-tos on the day-to-day aspects of running a program. They run a national coaching clinic every year, a couple of regional coaching clinics, and it's just a really valuable group to look into, especially if you're brand new. The other kind of cool thing is, like I said, I ran my own program for 3.5 years, stepped away, and I had a little bit of an itch a few years ago to kind of get back into at least helping out with a program. So I sit on an advisory board for a community college in Marshalltown, Iowa. And they're doing some really cool things on the academic side of esports, not just the competitive. And it's fun to meet, a couple times a semester and help out a program who's doing some really cool things at a level where not a lot of spotlight gets shown on those 2-year schools. But I think MCC is doing some awesome things, and I'm really, really thankful to be a part of that. All my contact info is on the screen. Feel free to screen capture that, write it down, call, text, email, whatever works best for you. Would be happy to answer questions if we don't get to them today. So I think the stereotypical, esports lab, or what we think of when you're building out a program or maybe planning for it, is something like this. It's a cool lit room with a bunch of high-end PCs and furniture and LED lights everywhere. But there's a lot of work and a lot of questions that have to be answered before you get to a facility that looks like this. And this is the lab that we were able to build at University of Jamestown. So I have fond memories of resurfacing countertops and painting walls and wiring up computers and all that stuff. But we certainly didn't get to this place overnight. I like to start kind of talking about, building out a facility with the couple of like questions. And the first one is like, why are you doing this in the first place? And I think it's really important to have a mission or a kind of a guiding North Star as to why you're building a program. And Jared talked about a ton of those benefits during his presentation. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but that student engagement piece, getting people active for the first time, giving them a home and a community to find kind of their tribe, the recruitment, the retention, better grades, all that kind of stuff. super great reasons to start an esports program. And definitely if you're looking at building something for the first time, these are things to expect and to really strive for. I guess the next thing to see, when you're building out a facility and planning for this is where in the school are you going to put it? We've worked with schools all over the country, and I've seen labs get thrown in classrooms that are renovated and built out to be the esports space, right? But I've also seen as many or more dual use purpose, classrooms. We've worked with this couple of schools that don't have space available on a consistent basis. So they're, laptop carts that are moving around and setting up in the cafeteria after school or in the library in a corner. So I would say don't discount those non-conventional spaces. But when you're looking in the school and kind of looking at where you want to find your home, there's a couple of things that definitely need to be talked about and addressed, at least in your planning. Square footage and capacity is kind of like the first one. How much can I actually fit in this room? As far as the amount of equipment, the amount of students. If I'm Jared and I've got 200 kids that are joining the Discord online, and we want to have an event or we want to have in-person practice, I want to have a space that can accommodate however many students I need to pull in at the end of the day. So just looking at that and making sure that you can, address fire code and all those things. They're a little boring to talk about, but they are important to mention. In the same vein, accessibility. Everybody on the call, I'm going to guess, is an educator or works in the school districts or in that type of an environment. So we know like accessibility is a huge thing. Esports is such a cool activity that allows us to, reach students that might not have been able to join a athletic team before. You think of a student in a wheelchair or some other disability to where they can't play basketball or play football, but they can hold the controller or they can sit down at a desk and play on a PC. So making sure that those students have access to that room and their needs are accommodated is super important. And I think there's some really cool things that you can do to accommodate those non-conventional student athletes. Power and internet. If you work in the tech offices, this is something that you're going to be really familiar with. But when you're evaluating, one room against the other, are there network drops? Can I have wired, stable internet? Do we have enough circuits to plug in all of this equipment so we don't blow power to half the school when we turn things on? Those are things to think about and to ask your facilities people if they have recommendations or if there's some construction work that needs to happen before you can move in, rather than just like, hey, we bought a bunch of computers, this is our lab, we're gonna get off the ground, and then you run into issues down the line. HVAC, this might sound silly to talk about, but as somebody who built an esports lab in a room that didn't have a working air conditioner the first year, that was a mistake. PCs nowadays don't throw a ton of heat. They're pretty efficient when it comes to that. But when you've got 20 computers in a room with 20 students sitting at those computers and another 10 to 20 hovering over their shoulders, and you shut the door and all of a sudden it gets pretty warm in that room. So making sure that everybody in the space is comfortable, the equipment is taken care of from just kind of a general climate control standpoint is really important. And then lighting, like I said in the beginning here, we have this picture of the Jamestown lab where it's dark, it's LED lighting, it's, screen lighting and things like that. Back in 2016, this was like the chic thing. This was like the stereotypical lab that everybody wanted. And I think we got smarter over the last 8 years in building spaces that are a little bit better for eye health, a little bit better to match the goal of the space, right? I think esports unfairly gets that stereotype of like, oh, you're bunch of gamers sitting in mom's basement in the dark. And really these are student athletes and they are striving for incredible things. And you would make sure that your football stadium has great lights for when the sun goes down. You can illuminate the field. Your basketball arena has good lighting so that players can see, and there's not issues there, and your spectators can see. The same kind of rules apply to esports. So I'm a big fan of even natural light, or dimmable, controllable lighting that you can kind of set the tone for when your players show up. We're here to do a job. We're here to compete. We're here to learn, and not necessarily like, hey, we're just wasting an hour playing video games after school. And then kind of like the last thing, will this be a multi-purpose space? Like I said, a lot of the labs and the schools that we work with will kind of take this approach because it's a great way to split the funding and be able to kind of make your dollars go farther, engage more people in the school. So if you are sharing the lab with a CAD teacher or somebody that's doing InDesign and Photoshop and Premiere Pro, or just general computer science or things like that, you want to make sure that those teachers and those students' needs are also met, and that it's not just a gaming space, but it's a place where those students can learn effectively and that the teachers can do their jobs. So important things to think about and remember when you're planning out where and what kind of space you're moving into. The big question after that is like, what do we actually do? And I want to preface this with like a needs versus wants conversation. I like the analogy that a Ferrari is really cool, and I would love to have one, right? I want to have one. But is like a Toyota Camry going to get me safely, reliably, and dependably from point A to point B for the next 20 years? Yeah, absolutely. So taking a look at where we can smartly spend money, what's going to go the farthest when it comes to equipment, and not necessarily go for the super flashy, fancy sounding stuff, and get the equipment that's going to make the biggest impact for the students and for my team. There's definitely kind of like a priority list when it comes to like, what do we need to address? And that starts with infrastructure and goes all the way down to like, what do you put on the walls? So there's a lot of different things that go into this. And we can kind of take each one one by one. I will preface this by saying I am not a network engineer. I'm not someone who is super technical on the infrastructure side of things. But I'm enough to be dangerous. And we ran into things while I was in charge of a program that kind of lend itself to some kind of gold standards for esports. I will say that for most schools, the connection that you have in the building right now is going to be good enough to get started. When we built the lab at Jamestown, we had 15 computers on a 500 meg connection. Now that was a separate VLAN than the rest of the campus or than the rest of the school. So we had some help in that regard. But it was not this crazy, insanely fast internet connection that we had tons of bandwidth for. But it was enough to get started, and our students had a good experience. Now, when we added more devices and we jumped up to 30, 40 devices by the time I left, yeah, we needed more internet, and we did upgrade that to a gig by the time that I left Jamestown. But my guess is most schools have the existing infrastructure to where, yes, you've got hundreds of devices walking around during the day, those Chromebooks, iPads, cell phones, administrative devices, the list goes on and on and on, right? Of what's going out there and pinging your internet. Esports happens in most cases at the end of the day when all of that traffic is not happening. So it gives you an advantage, and it's not something that I have to worry about spending a ton of money on right away. Like I said, it might be something that you choose to upgrade in year 2 or year 3 after you've gotten your feet wet and experienced what that looks like from a day-to-day operation. But my guess is most schools are going to be well set up on the internet side of things. Like I said, a separate network is always a good idea. It's kind of the industry standard at this point to put your esports machines on a VLAN. That's different than the rest of the school. Your firewall permissions are going to be different. You're going to have to open up ports to access these games. And that's going to be a conversation you're going to need to have with your network admins, with your IT department, to figure out the best strategy for doing that safely and protecting your data in a way that doesn't leave the school vulnerable. There's not a right or a wrong way to do that. There are some schools that just flip the switch and open the internet to everything for those 2 hours that they have practice. And there are others that have a much kind of more fine-tuned way of controlling that access. But it's something that you're going to have to come up with a strategy for. Again, like wired over Wi-Fi, if you can do it until Wi-Fi 7 is everywhere, do your best to get a wired internet connection. It's going to be more stable. The performance is going to be better. Your students are going to have a better time. And you're just going to have less headaches overall if you can plug into the wall. Now, like I said, Wi-Fi 7 might totally invalidate that everything that I just said, but we're too early on in the process to know exactly what that's going to look like. And 5G and LTE and things like that is what I would consider like a band-aid solution. It works for small quantities of devices, and we've tested this kind of in-house at Bytespeed with a couple of different solutions that we have. Cradle Point router is something that we've been doing a lot of, like bus Wi-Fi and like mobile internet over that cellular connection. And we've tested it for gaming, and it's good for about 5 computers. And after that, you really start to see some performance dips. But it's something that we're going to keep an eye on. But that kind of the best practice is if you can get an Ethernet plug, get plugged into the wall. And maybe that limits where in the school you can put your esports lab, or if you're willing to run some cabling and kind of outfit a space to be able to accommodate those devices. And then kind of the last thing on the infrastructure side is running updates. The game of basketball has had the same rules relatively for the last 20 years, right? Esports gets a new rule update every 2 weeks. In some cases, there are patches and updates that happen to these games on a consistent basis that you're going to have to download before you can launch and play. And that's just the simple fact of it. So making sure that you have a strategy in place for when, Overwatch gets an 8 gig update overnight and we don't know about it. And we've got a match at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I've got to get, at least 5 computers, probably 6, updated to run that update, download all of that data, get the game reinstalled in a way that I can play it. If we're walking into the lab at 3:45, chances are we're not starting at 4 o'clock. So having a strategy to either do those updates during off hours or put a caching server in place to kind of speed that up, having a strategy for that is going to be really important. After infrastructure, we go to devices, and I really should have kind of a split at this point between PC hardware and console stuff, because the Nintendo Switch is absolutely a viable way to get started. It's an essential piece of hardware for running your esports programs, but I guess this presentation doesn't have that in here right now. But the big question is always like, how much equipment do we need? What do we need to buy to get this off the ground? And that really depends on a couple of factors. Number one, like what games are you playing at the very simplest. Most of the PC-based esports titles out there are 5-on-5, Rocket League being the exception at 3-on-3. So to be able to play in a competitive environment or just have a starting roster play, I need a device for each one of those students. So you could get away with 3 computers if you just wanted to build a Rocket League team, and you could start playing with just 3 computers. What we found and what I would say like the national average is that schools will kind of start with around 10 machines. And that's really to be able to field kind of an A and a B squad for scrimmages in practice. So if I have, 5 League of Legends players on my varsity roster team, and then I have another 5 on like my B team, my JV, whatever I want to call it, I need 10 devices so that they can play against each other in practice. And that is like kind of what we've seen the national average of being when it comes to PCs. The specs, we're in a good spot with a lot of the esports titles right now that um, uh, those games are really well optimized to run on like entry level gaming hardware. If you think of like a developer wants the most amount of players to play their game as possible, right? So they're not going to gatekeep access to their competitive game by saying, hey, you need a spaceship to be able to launch Rocket League. So they're well optimized to run on kind of lesser entry level grade hardware, which helps with the cost tremendously. So what you want to do is look at, what's the bare minimum to run these games and then balance that with a little bit of future proofing. So as far as specs are concerned, I've got some example builds on the screen, and I did see a question from Mark about gaming laptops. If you would have asked me this question 2 years ago, I would have said run in the opposite direction. Do not try and play on a laptop. But the tech has actually gone and come a long ways in the last couple of years, to where it's a viable option. Like I said, we've helped some schools that they don't have a permanent home for their esports program, and they have gaming laptops on a cart that they're wheeling around and just going into whatever available space that they have, and that works great for them. So it is definitely an option. I would say it's not the common option, but it is definitely on the table if that's a situation you need to be in. As far as specs for both laptops and desktop computers, I would say that the build on the left-hand side here is over half of the machines that we build at Bytespeed. And this is, thinking we ship, oh gosh, 300 orders a year in the gaming world, right? So i5, Ryzen 5, kind of like I said, entry level, mid-level processors. 16 gigs of RAM is kind of the sweet spot. You get diminishing returns after that on just like gaming performance. A terabyte for storage nowadays is kind of the standard. Storage got really, really cheap over the last couple of years, so it's worth it to grab that terabyte worth of storage. Windows installs are as big as they ever have been. If you're playing a number of different titles, you're going to be installing a lot of stuff on those computers. Call of Duty Warzone isn't like a big high school title, but it's played at the college level. That's like a 200 gig install. It's ridiculous. So we've kind of just standardized on a terabyte worth of storage, and that gives you access to be able to save video recordings to those machines to run in film review during practice, or be able to have a wide library installed on those computers. On the graphics card side of things, the 1660 Super is kind of on its way out. But the Intel GPUs that came out in the last year or two have really slotted themselves well into that really entry-level performance point at a really, really nice price point. And like I said, you don't need much. You do need a graphics card to play a lot of these titles. You can get away with onboard graphics on your processor in a pinch, but I would say actually having a true graphics card in your machine will be a better experience. Your standard heat sinks and power supplies, nothing crazy there. And that build on the left is going to run most esports titles just fine. You're not going to be cranking things up to, ultra settings and running ray tracing and doing things like that. But you're going to be able to play on competition level settings, and your students will have a good experience. If you've got a little bit more room in the budget, you want to do a little bit more with those machines, video editing, streaming, maybe there's some curriculum stuff that needs a little bit extra hardware and horsepower. Then we kind of move up to that mid-level system on the right. i7, Ryzen 7, 16 gigs of RAM, 32 if you're going to do some streaming or video encoding and things like that. Again, kind of similar for storage. Maybe we look at a 40 series graphics card, like a 4060, 4070, somewhere in there, and then bump up the power supplies accordingly just to accommodate those bigger GPUs. Mark again has a question here. I've heard about monitors and sync rates. Yes, we're going to talk about peripherals on the next slide. So great guess there on the hardware there, Mark. As far as peripherals go, monitors are definitely like on the tier list. They are the one of the most important things to look at. They're all important, but definitely like having a good gaming rated display is super important for that competitive environment if you're building an esports program. 24-inch 144 hertz is kind of like the gold standard. That it means that you're going to have that panel refreshing a frame about every like 6.5 milliseconds, which is over 3 times faster than like your standard office monitor that most of us are probably watching today on, right? Your standard, accounting desktop has probably like a 60 hertz monitor, same thing in like your general computer labs. That's going to show a new frame like every 16.5 to 17 milliseconds, whereas like a 144 hertz panel, like I said, is going to be like 3 times faster. After that, the performance jumps going from like 144 hertz to 240 is a lot smaller. It's only like a difference of two milliseconds. But that 144 hertz does make a big difference. The other thing to look at is response time, and that's typically like a millisecond. And that's what you're going to look at as far as like when you're looking at a monitor description, the things to keep in mind. Please don't waste your money on a curved monitor. You're going to spend $100 more for really no benefit. And in fact, in some cases, it depending on the size of the screen and the extent of the curve, you could distort your aspect ratio, and where I might be clicking on one thing on the screen, but I'm actually not clicking on that target because my aspect ratio has been distorted. So don't waste your money on a curved monitor. 24 inches is all the bigger you need to go. And you'll be in really good shape with that kind of a standard for your gaming panels. Keyboards and mice, look for something mechanical. This is not a spot where you have to break the bank. We are a big fan of the Logitech G series line. They've got really good options from like, $40-$50 all the way up to, 200 plus. But you can find really affordable, good entry level mechanical hardware on the keyboard and mice standpoint for very affordable when it kind of stacks up to the rest of your equipment. Mechanical mice and keyboards, they're more responsive. They've got better customization. Yes, you can make them turn, school colors for LEDs and lights and stuff, and that's cool. But really, the performance is what you're looking for. And then the last thing here is headsets. Having something that's over the ear that you can also have a microphone attached to is a necessity. It still kind of surprises me when I hear a school say, like, hey, they're going to be sitting right next to each other. Why do we need headsets? They can talk to each other. The important thing is like you need to hear game audio. In a lot of cases, that is like a make or break a difference in winning a game or winning an engagement or scoring a goal. Having the game audio in your ear is really important, and kind of tuning out the rest of the room. Because, like you said, Jared's got 30 to 40 to 50 students that are on his varsity program, right? He's got 200 kids that are all talking together, and, they might not all be in the same physical space, but if you've got a room of 30 kids and I'm trying to talk to my teammates who are, 3-4 seats down, I need a microphone and to be able to use Discord and talk to them. So having something, again, you don't have to break the bank on that hardware, but it is definitely important. I do have the console stuff in here. So forget what I said before. Nintendo Switch is kind of the way to go on the console side of things. The OLED version is the newer model of the Switch. And I recommend you go for an OLED. It's $50 more expensive than the base version, but it's got that LAN port directly built into the dock. So that means you can get wired internet without having to buy an adapter, without having to jump through another hoop. You also have the newer version of that hardware and a bigger screen if that matters when you're in handheld mode, which you should never need, but it is kind of the version that I would recommend you look for. Pro controllers definitely are a good thing if you're, just from a comfort standpoint, also from a performance standpoint, they're going to hold up a little bit better than just the Joy-Cons. They're going to fit your hands a little bit better and just be a better experience overall. And then maybe look at, GameCube controllers and adapters for like titles like Super Smash Brothers. Those are pretty cheap accessories to be able to add on and give your players a little bit better experience. And then lastly, storage, consoles, like a Switch. There is a definite possibility of things, growing legs and walking away. So having some kind of a lockable cabinet, or a cart that you can wheel around or something like that, to where you can secure this stuff during off hours, is definitely a smart thing to do. And there kind of gives you a little bit more customization for your room too, to be able to say, yeah, that's our Nintendo Switch cart. It's blinged out with our school logo and some colors and a big 60-inch screen or something like that. Definitely things that aren't necessary, but could be something to look at. And kind of the last thing that we'll talk about, because I know my time is coming up here, is just how. You might be thinking, Josh, this sounds expensive, and I don't want to lie to you. There is some investment that you have to make up front, but the good thing is that, if you plan accordingly, and you make this purchase in, let's say, 2024, you're not going to have to buy that equipment again, until you either expand the facility or, in 3 or 4 or 5 years when you need to refresh that hardware. But you should be set for a long time. I always tell people that the goal should be to have an annual sustainable budget, just like the basketball team, just like the football team, just like the speech team or the choir. You should have an annual budget that's allocated to your esports program. That does not happen in a lot of cases in that first year. So to supplement that, to get you off the ground, a lot of schools will turn to grant writing. And we've got a page on our website. If you take anything away from my presentation, look at bytespeed.com/resources/funding. We've pulled together a list of 60 or 70 different grants that are STEM, education, CTE kind of based, that your school may qualify for, it might not. But it's worth looking at. Carl Perkins funding has been a big reason to or a good outfit to be able to get hardware. Carl Perkins funds CTE, career exploration development kind of stuff. And these machines that you would use for esports will do what Carl Perkins needs extremely well. So that we've definitely seen schools take advantage of that funding and have success building out labs. And then there's other things that you can do to kind of supplement that. Fundraising with things like eTeam Sponsor, your crowdfunding platforms, apparel sales, jersey raffles, doing 50-50 at the basketball event or something like that. Those are all things that are not going to fund you year to year, and they're probably not going to get you your first equipment buy, but those are things that can kind of supplement and add to hopefully that sustainable budget. And the more students you have showing up, the more documentation that you can have about, like, Jared had on his presentation, our grades are better. They're taking more credits. They're getting scholarships. Document those things, because that's great stuff to bring to your administration to say, hey, we are worth giving some dollars to because we're doing some great things. And then the last thing that I'll say on kind of the funding part is the sponsorships and partnerships. This is kind of just the nature of esports, is this gets brought up in conversation all the time. But what I would say is start with your local businesses and your booster clubs and people in the community that are already supporting your school. You are going to get way better traction and way better results talking to the local company in Bloomington and saying, hey, our school is doing some awesome things. Can you help us out by, giving us $1,000 for jerseys or something like that, rather than going out to a national company and saying, hey, you've never heard of my school before, but we started esports. A lot of times that's not going to go anywhere. But your local companies, your booster clubs, people that are already invested in your students and in your school are definitely going to take a look at esports and say, wow, this is impactful. These students are getting some really great experience out of this. I get some local marketing potentially for my business or my company. And it's a great way to kind of just build more stakeholders for your program in general. So where do I go from here? That's the big question. There are things like streaming and doing broadcasting and event planning and all these other things that you can kind of start to work on after you've built out your facility or built out your team and gotten the hardware for what you need to get started. And that's definitely like for the existing programs or for people who have been around for a couple of years and have their own teams. Those are valuable things that you can do to get more students involved. I might have just 5 starters that are on my League of Legends team, and that's my competitive team. But like, what do I do with the rest of those students who might not have the skill to be on that competitive level? Might want to do more than just show up for club night a couple nights a week. They want to be involved in some way. That broadcasting piece of it is a great way to keep those kids involved. Get them to create new graphics for your program, run the stream, do that social media promotion that Jared was talking about. And those are great things that you can kind of add to your program after you get going. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. If you've got questions, especially on just kind of hardware in general or facility needs or things like that, feel free to reach out to Brian and I. Really appreciate the work that LTC is doing to spread the good word of esports. And Illinois is definitely well on its way to being a leader in the country as far as the state infrastructure is concerned. So thanks so much for having us and have a great rest of your week.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. And there's a question in the chat. If you can answer that in the chat as well. But
oh, sure. Yep.
Hear it out loud. That's fine. Well, I'll give you time to answer that. And again, if anyone in the group has more questions, feel free to drop them in. I'm going to give it over here to Michael. Michael's from Liberty CUSD 1, and he's going to talk about his perspective on esports from tech director, and he has some information to share from his coach as well.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Everybody see me okay?
Yep, and I'm going to put you on spotlight here as well. So, and you can share your screen if you would like as well.
Okay, first of all, I don't have any screen to share because I don't have any slide deck or anything. Basically, I'm the tech director here at this Liberty School. We're student enrollment about 650. 3 years ago at this time, our computer science teacher was talking to me about getting some computers through a CTE grant for her program for multimedia, video, things like that, and also working with the yearbook. Unfortunately, right after she got the grant and the school year ended, we were informed she wasn't coming back due to some family situations. So we scrambled and got a new computer teacher. As soon as he got here, he had interest in esports. And he goes, by the way, I've got this money here to buy some computers. So we reached out to Bytespeed and bought 5 systems from them, pretty much spec as was in Josh's presentation. So we got those in place. And the original intent was that they were going to use those for multimedia creation. I don't know anything about gaming. My gaming history was running Wolfenstein 3D on DOS or Donkey Kong on a Nintendo console. So I kind of date myself. This new teacher came in, he wanted to do esports, and once we placed the order for the PCs, saw that those would probably be adequate for gaming. He then proceeded to sign us up for an esports program, and I was tasked with getting everything ready in 2 weeks for the start of the season. So from an IT side, that's a daunting challenge because I come from a networking background. I spent 16 years working for the local ISP, and for me, cybersecurity was a huge issue. So we had to make sure that we had everything set up properly. Bandwidth was not an issue. We have a fiber connection coming into the building, well-wired building. We have fiber cabinets throughout the facility. And the room where we were putting this equipment had been a computer lab that had 24 2008 iMacs in it that we had just gotten rid of. Since we're one-to-one school, we weren't really expecting to have a lot of lab computers, and the lab computers we're going to have would be devoted to the yearbook, the multimedia program. So as I nevertheless, in September of 21, I was tasked with getting us up and running for esports. So first thing we did is we created a separate VLAN for those devices. We have a pfSense firewall, and reached out to the tech community between the Tech Geeks mailing list and some others, got some information on how to configure our pfSense firewall to support a secure network. The computers were placed in a classroom and placed on side by side on about an 8-foot long table. So kids were sitting side by side. We also received a grant or somebody to purchase of 4 Nintendo Switches. So we had those available to us as well. So again, we just started into the program. From a network perspective, one thing that we found out right away is, as was alluded to earlier about the updates, it was during a school day that they decided to plug one of the Nintendo Switches into the dedicated Ethernet port on that gaming VLAN. And I'm in my office, and all of a sudden I'm looking at my bandwidth utilization go from like 60 megs throughout the whole building to 600 to 700 to almost 800. As they keep plugging each Nintendo Switch in, they were downloading updates and basically saturating our network connection. So that was an interesting development. So we had to make some modifications on the network, do some rate limiting on ports, and then set up some parameters for when those devices can be connected, and obviously not during the school day. So another challenge that we faced was with some of these games was the NAT. On the plus side, we had a subnet of public IP addresses from our ISP that I could reserve about six of them out of the subnet to do one-to-one NAT translation from the firewall to a specific device, and create a little small pool of static addresses, a pool of dynamic addresses, depending on which device was plugged in. And that worked fine on some of the PCs for some of the games, but I'm on the way home one evening about 4 o'clock or so, and I'm getting this frantic text message saying our game isn't working. And it turned out that whatever game they were playing at the time, all the devices need to see each other on a common LAN. Well, with one-to-one NAT, you can't do that without setting up some really complicated firewall rules to do hairpin NAT. So we're trying to come up with solutions to make that work. We eventually wound up just setting up a solution where we took a couple static IPs that were one-to-one NAT and got a high-end consumer router, connected those to specific ports on the wall in the room that are identified. So if they're playing a game that needs to have that LAN communication between the devices, they're using that. But if they're using a PC or something that needs to use the one-to-one NAT straight out, it's a different set. So it's a little bit of complication for us. My biggest concern, naturally, from an IT perspective, after just hearing of the recent cybersecurity incident outside St. Louis, is protecting our network. So that's the biggest concern that we have. I'm going to share here, put it in the notes. This is notes from our esports sponsor. It's one of our science teachers She's sponsoring the program now because since we started the esports program, we are now on our third computer science teacher. So we've had a very, very difficult time of it in terms of developing it, which, Jared's presentation was great because, and with this being recorded, I can share it with staff and admin, say, okay, if we really want to get this esports program going well, here's some guidance, here's some things to do. Again, from my perspective, I was kind of forced into it, and not that I don't mind helping, but I don't know what I don't know, and I have a quote unquote day job to deal with. So I can't devote the amount of time to an esports program that it probably might have needed. But I think we're in a position now, we understand it well enough to fine tune it, tweak it, and get it to where it needs to be. So again, the notes from the teacher are there. I appreciated her shout out to me for my support. She has a vested interest in it too, because her son has been on the team since it started, and she is actually he's actually, I think he was a runner-up in the state last year. So she's looking at a potential for a scholarship. So again, we're a small school district, got into this thing pretty much by accident. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to share the little bit of knowledge that I have and experience, and just gathering the information just from Jared and Josh to help us here on our standpoint and develop the program.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. And yeah, just hearing your experiences with what you have been doing with esports at Liberty, and then also sharing the notes from your coach. We sure appreciate that. And I know in the notes it talked about different leagues that you guys all play. And I know Jared had mentioned in chat that he can speak on some of the leagues that his team is in as well.
Yeah, so I've actually done all those leagues. So my school's participated in all those leagues. When we first started esports, we did Playverse. And then of course we moved from Playverse into the IHSEA, and I'll just put the link in chat. And then of course most schools today do also doing the IHSA. That was kind of with all the high schools in Illinois being part of the IHSA. When the IHSA approved esports as an activity/sport, I saw, because I got a lot of inquiries, like people reaching out to me about like, hey, what do we have to do to get ready for our kids to compete on those 2 weekends? And so you have kind of two groups of people in Illinois, two general populations of schools. Schools have been doing esports for 4 or 5 years previously, before the IHSA, and then a whole new group of schools that are coming on board for the IHSA, which just happened, which is kind of cool. So I tell everyone the IHSEA is the best place to go. It's $200 for all the games. They offer a huge amount of games, more than the IHSA, and you're going to find out that a lot of your students are playing other games. And it's kind of like a safe place to start, because they have seasons. You get to play matches every week, and then you have playoffs. Most of those playoffs are in person, which is cool. So you get the experience of traveling with your team and playing other schools in person, which is pretty fantastic. So for anyone that's listening, I strongly suggest the IHSEA. And then of course that'll prepare you for the IHSA, which is our official like state series for a couple of those games, and you'll be ready to go. Playverse, with them, I got it for free because I was a super coach. But once my super coach ran out, I stopped using them just because I wasn't happy with the service, and I was spending a lot of nights setting up games, and then all of a sudden getting there ready with my team. My team's ready to play, and then there's a no-show, and it just wasn't a good experience. I know they moved to free, and so it's another possibility for schools to look at if they really want to get more reps and practice. I'd say, okay, we'll do the IHSEA and then do Playverse so you can get those extra reps. So that's pretty much in the league side. And anything else, it's one of those things where the IHSA will give you a year-long calendar. You can see what games are being played. You can put feelers out to your students ahead of times. Maybe they have a game like Call of Duty. You have a lot of Call of Duty players in your school. You can run a Call of Duty team. You might find out that you don't have Overwatch players, so you don't worry about it. You just don't play it. But we have found that it's been the easiest way to get the most student engagement across our buildings.
Okay, that's good to know. You had mentioned IHSEA and IHSA. So does IHSEA not have tournaments?
They do. Yeah. So the IHSEAs, you play like a traditional season, like a sport, like basketball. You have a basketball season, and then at the end of the season, you have playoffs. The IHSEA models that. So we'll have, for example, a Rocket League season that'll be 5-6 weeks, and you play a match or 2 matches a week. And then they take the best teams at the end of the regular season, and we all then play in the playoffs. The IHSA it's based around where you have 2 weekends. We'll have sectionals one weekend, and then the top 2 teams from every sectional move on to the state series. So it's only a 2 weekend event, and so to really justify for a lot of schools to like have esports, you need to get more butts and seats. So the IHSEA is probably the best avenue because you're going to have a large category of games. I think we offer 12 games now, and they run year round almost. So they start in August and will end in April. So we have a very long breadth. Now the games don't run that whole length. They have seasons. So like a game only run for 8 weeks, and then another 8 weeks of different game runs. So you can take breaths if you want as the sponsor or coach. But once you see the games they offer, I went along the route of, okay, these are the games that we can play in the IHCA. And then I fed that to my students, my committee, my leadership team. And we said, okay, what games can we realistically play and have the players for? Currently, we play all of them, but I know I'm in a unique situation. Not all schools can. And my advice to new programs is not to pick 1 or 2 games and then kind of run with that.
And I like that advice. And you said you just had talked to your students, which games they would want to play and go from there.
Correct. Because you can't. It's really hard on the competitive side to like have casual players because the level plays high in some of these games, and so it's not a fun experience. So we always try to stress like, hey, we're going to do this competitively. Do we have 5, 6, 7 kids that are dedicated? If a title like Rocket League has 3, I want 4 players because if a kid's sick, they're doing track, or they got plays, or they got something else going on, I still have a team I can field. And of course, with the 5-player games, like Brian was talking about, I try to have 7 players that are dedicated to that roster at minimum. Now, of course, some of my games like Valorant, I had 2 rosters, 2 varsity rosters, 2 JV rosters, all with 5 to 7 kids on them. So I was looking at 22 kids across our district that were playing just that one game for 8 weeks. And then a lot of times those kids won't play other games because they're just dedicated to that game. And so then when the next season rolls over, we go like to winter season. Now we're in Smash right now. I have a whole new group of kids playing Smash. And right now we're in Smash, we're in Overwatch, and we're in Fortnite. And so I have now 35, 40 totally different kids playing those titles. And then when that's over, we move into the next season, which will be like Rocket League. I think Call of Duty, which is a new one we're offering this year. And I have a feeling that's going to be huge because we have tons of Call of Duty fans.
All right, thank you. And as you were talking, I know Mark put in chat that there's a Midwest Esports Invitational. Do you, Jared, or anyone else out there that's with us today, do you guys attend these esports invitationals besides some of these other events?
Yeah, great question. So it depends on the team and the location of the invitational. So like a lot of the colleges host events. And yeah, if my schedule's open and the player schedule's open, then I'll reserve the school bus and we'll go drive to these invitationals. The nice thing about most high school invitationals, especially if they're hosted by a college, is they're free. So a lot of times the colleges want to host and they want your players to come to their campus because one, they also want esports students to see what they're offering at the college, but then even if they don't want the student there for esports, they might want them there as just a regular student. So it's part of, and so that seems to be one of the best ways to like get a lot of activity with the colleges, community colleges. And then there's some LAN events that people just host within conferences. Up north it's more popular than down south of I-80 because of school density. but there are some northern schools that belong to athletic conferences, and they already have like an e-sport conference with them amongst their schools that are in their athletic conference. And so they're having like inter-conference competitions, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you. And then in chat, Kyle asked a question. I don't know if you can pull it up. If not, is there typically, or could you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah. So what's great about all the leagues that we belong to, like especially the IHSCA, is if your district doesn't allow you to play a game, you don't have to play it. It's when you join the association or join the league, you get to pick and choose a la carte what games that you want to play, which is really fantastic. So if there's like a game that maybe has too violent, then you just don't play it, and you're not out anything. And then of course that's always going to be a concern. We do have a couple schools that can't play certain games. I had when I first started esports, that was a huge concern with my building principal, but then also my school board as a whole and my superintendent. And so we had to sit down. We had to have some of those conversations of like, what do our students consume? Where are they consuming what they consume? And when we kind of looked at all the kind of the facts, it's like everything our students do has inherent risks. You can play football, get a concussion. Our soccer players have horrible concussions. Cheerleading, you can fall and break your neck. So we looked at it and says, okay, well, what's the actual risk? And then we looked at the literature, and the literature said that there's no risk. And so we are playing games that might have weapons and things like that, but we have steered away from mature titles. So like Rainbow Siege 6, we don't play.
And you referenced literature. Is that any literature you can add to chat or share out? I'm going to send out an email with some of the resources shared today and the recording. Is it anything you can send me?
I don't have it offhand, but it's easily Googleable. Like,
Okay.
do video games cause violence? Things like that. And the evidence out there says it doesn't. And what's really cool about esports, and what we kind of stress too, is like part of our job is like anything else, like any activity, is like, what does responsible play look like? I want my students, and this is a great selling point, you can explain to administrators, or maybe people are listening now are like, yeah, I'm kind of concerned about that. I don't want my students playing 12 hours a week. I want to maybe playing max 8. We talk about like, what does healthy gaming look like? If you get in a match and it really makes you upset, like, why is that? How do we manage those kind of feelings? No different than a normal athlete. You see it a lot of times, like in basketball. I mean, you don't want a kid in the gym shooting 6 hours of free throws. I mean, that's just it's not good life balance. So that's also part of esports, is that, that digital balance with real life balance. And I think it's a lot more receptive when it comes from an esport coach than say like their parents. And because we're connected with the students, like through Discord, there are times where like I'm on Discord and I can see one of my Rocket League players is on at 11 o'clock at night. And before I go to bed, I'll send him a DM, which is called a direct message. I'm like, hey, do you have your homework done? And maybe you should probably go to bed. You got school tomorrow. And they're like, yeah, you're probably right. So no different than your athletic coaches kind of looking out and watching over your players. But yeah, that's always going to be something in the background. Violence in video games, but that's also with regular sports too.
Well, thank you so much, Jared. And I know even after today's session, there might be more questions that come up. When I share this out, Jared, Michael, Brian, and I know Josh got off. Are you guys okay with me sharing out your emails to the group as well?
Yes,
Absolutely. Yep.
Perfect. And then also here in chat, people had added some other things. So thank you. So go ahead and look through that, grab any emails. Mark had talked about he's trying to start a tournament downstate. Yes, please, Mark, let us know if you do get something started so we can share that out and drum up more interest for you as well. And yeah, Dave added on to what Jared was just talking about with if the students play too much, what they may get carpal tunnel. But so from this, we appreciate your time joining us. And again, thank you to everyone, to Jared, Michael, and Brian, make sure, let Josh know, to thank him for everything he did today. So if they want to reach out, then Brian, do they go through the ILTPP to get quotes? Can they go directly to you? What's the process?
If they go directly to us, the pricing will be a little better, but I know ILTPP has reps that can help shop around a bit too. So we are part of the ILTPP. So either or, it's totally fine.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining. And I think we've got a couple minutes left. I know Zach's on. I don't know if Jared realized that video that he showed was of one of Zach's players from Salem. Zach, do you want to add anything?
Oh, that was years ago, but that was a very fond memory. And I think that was 4 or 5 years ago. And every year we have moments like that. And so it's nice to reminisce, but it's also great to know that through esports, like, it's still happening after all these years and only growing and getting bigger. So yeah, those moments are still in the making.
Well, good to hear. Well, thank you for sharing that. All right. This will all be sent out. So if you have any further questions, please let us know. If not, have a great day and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.